Great. So thank you for joining us. My name is Ross Yelsey. I work in the admissions office here at Columbia Journalism School. I'd like to thank you for tuning into this program that's a very small, close-knit program, the Ph.D. in Communications here at Columbia Journalism School, although it's very popular. So I'm really glad to have a good amount of people from all over the world tuning in to learn more about this very unique doctoral degree. I'm really happy also to have Professor Andie Tucher, who's the director of the program, and the H. Gordon Garbedian Professor of Journalism at the school to talk more about the school from her perspective, and also an alum of the program, recent alum named Alex Gonçalves, who is a professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, who will talk a bit about what it's like to be a student in this particular PhD program. So I thought to start, Andie, maybe we can just talk a little bit big picture about, what is this program about? I mean, a lot of people are kind of researching doctoral programs, maybe know exactly what they're looking for, but if they're kind of thinking broadly about like what this program could offer them, what makes this particular program unique? What is its focus, and why is the word multidisciplinary very important to kind of what we do here?
Yeah. What makes us different from almost every other communications PhD program in the US anyway, is that we take a very flexible, interactive, multidisciplinary approach. The idea of communications can mean so many different things to so many different people. It's a kind of a squishy discipline, and many communications programs try to corral it into a department and say you're going to take a communications 101 and communications 1210. What we do is we define communications very broadly as the study of the relationships between media and people in their economic, social, political, historical context. So that takes a wide view of the way that media functions in society. We offer a few courses here in our own particular program, but most of the coursework that students do takes part in the rest of the university. They have access to courses in almost any of the graduate divisions of the university, and they often take courses in departments like history, political science, sociology. They take law school courses, they will take business school courses, and all of that is to put together a program of study that reflects their particular intellectual needs. That's something we do really well, is that we can, because we're small and because we have access to this great research university, we can allow students to put together a course of study that fills their research needs.
Great. And in terms of that, in terms of all these different ideas people might have for research ideas, are there particular areas or topics that can be well supported by the faculty that are available here? Like if they're thinking about the fit, are there areas of strength that they should kind of consider for us?
Yeah. There are some aspects, some areas that we're not really strong in, and that's something that's important for you to know when you're making your decision. But we have faculty who are really interested in what I would call our strengths: journalism history, communications history, social media, right-wing social media in particular, religion and media, technological aspects, economic aspects. Um, those are the main ones. We have on our core PhD faculty, we have one professor whose background is in sociology, and two whose backgrounds are in history. And we also have a advisory subcommittee that consists of, I think it's 12 or 13 faculty members in other divisions who also function as basically our department. So they come from political science, law, sociology, history, and several other international affairs, several other divisions as well. You can see it on the screen.
Yeah, so those are the core faculty at our school. Yourself, Michael Shudson, and Richard John are the two other faculty in our school, and then there's these other faculty you mentioned who are also part of the subcommittee. One thing that sometimes people get confused about, in my experience, is that they see our website and they see our kind of larger roster of faculty at the journalism school. There's amazing journalists who work in audio, investigations, video, broadcast. Are those people that PhD students would be working with formally here?
Usually not. No, we are very separate from the professional MS program that teaches students the techniques and skills of journalism. That takes most of our big building here. We're a very small program, but we have an academic focus. We are a scholarly program. We do not teach, and we don't have access to courses in how to do journalism, how to report, how to do audio. What we do is offer access to the rest of the university besides the journalism school.
Great. And then in terms of the kind of question I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this or watching the video of this may be wondering is like, so what makes for a compelling application to this type of program? What do you and your colleagues look for in a good fit application for this program?
We want to have a sense of why a multidisciplinary program is right for you, what you could do here that you couldn't do in a traditional department of sociology or in a traditional school of communications. We're very interested in the research questions you're interested in pursuing. We don't want to know the answers yet. We expect you shouldn't have the answers if you want to go to school. You should come and explore. But what we look for is a good idea of an intellectual journey. We want to know what interests you in those questions, what you've done before that maybe feeds into your interest in those questions. But we want you to take seriously your statement of academic research interest because that's the thing that we focus on the most. If it's something that we can't really support, well, we might not be the right place for you. Please don't think that you need to write an application that will get you in. And what can I say that will get me in? If it isn't going to give you the research support you need, this isn't the right place to get in. But what you want to do is be honest, be clear, but be, it's this is what we understand. This is preliminary. We understand you're not going to have the answers yet, but we want to know what you think where you think you're going to end up.
Great, great advice. And Alex, maybe you can tell people a bit about your journey here to this school and to this program. What were you doing before you came to Columbia, and how did you decide that you wanted to pursue a doctorate?
So I was doing a master's at MIT. So my program was called Comparative Media Studies, that is housed inside of the MIT Media Lab. By that point, I had already decided to actually to continue in academia, right? So I think the question is what I was doing before my master's, right? So before my master's, I was a science reporter in Brazil. I was working for a mainstream newspaper called O Estado de São Paulo. That is more or less, I think, if you want to compare with the Wall Street Journal here, it's more or less the same share of the readership and more or less the same type of audience. And I started teaching in the trainee program for that newspaper. And I noticed that I loved that. I loved teaching. And so then that's when I decided actually to go back to graduate school. And I had this choice. I could continue in Brazil or I could look for a program abroad. And I decided to go abroad. And that's when I came to the US. First, I went to this master's at MIT. And this program didn't have a PhD, right? So that's why I started looking for PhD programs here in the US.
Great. Can you tell us more about that process of doing research when you're like the people who are attending the session are doing this research phase, like learning about different opportunities for a doctoral study? What was your process like, and how did you come to determine that this kind of curriculum, this multidisciplinary program, really did fit what you wanted to do?
Great. So what I did was basically I mean first I listed all the PhD programs in communication right here and that I could find here in the US. And I started reading the scholarship, right, and the bios of all the professors who were teaching in those departments, right, and seeing how much intersection there was with my interests. So, and then in the end, I applied for 5 programs, right? I think I can mention all of them. So Columbia, I applied to the PhD program in the School of Information at Berkeley, UPenn Annenberg, UT Austin, and Stanford. And then I didn't get into Stanford, but I got into the other 4 programs, right? So then I had to decide, I mean, which one I would choose. And again, I talked to the professors, right, in all those programs, right, and I tried to see, I mean, if I would be a good fit for their program, and also if the program was a good fit for my research interests, right, what I wanted to do in my career. And I think the reason, I mean, some of the reasons that led me to choose Columbia was one, I knew that my research would be related to newsrooms and to journalism, right? So my research actually ended up being political communication, but also in the relationship between mainstream media and alternative media, especially right-wing media in Brazil. And this program is inside the PhD program at Columbia is inside the most prestigious journalism school in the country, right? And I was also attracted by the professors in the program. So, for instance, my advisor in the master's program, Ethan Zuckerman, he really admired Michael Schudson, who is in the PhD program at Columbia, right? So he put me in contact with Michael. I was also interested in working with Mark Hansing, right, who had just been hired by the school to lead the Brown Institute. So Michael became my advisor, and Mark was part also of my committee. And I was also friends with an alum from the program that was Benjamin Peters. I met him in a conference and we became very good friends. So that was also, I mean, now Ben is a professor in the University of Tucson, right? So I was able to talk to him and say, hey, what do you think? Is this program a good fit for me? So I think those were some of the reasons that I chose Columbia.
Great. That's really, yeah, it's a great way to kind of explain this process, which it takes a lot of time to kind of figure out where your fit might be. But could you maybe tell us a little bit more about this multidisciplinary, theme that we're talking about? What makes your research particularly multidisciplinary? What were the kind of the things you were weaving together, that, made this again a good place for you in terms of the ways you were approaching the questions of research and the kinds of disciplines that would make sense for doing that?
Yeah, so basically, I was looking for people who had experience doing research on the sociology of newsrooms, but I also wanted to have access. I mean, if you look at, Andie mentioned that, right? So the dedicated faculty in the program is small, right? So it's basically three scholars, but then we have a large extended faculty that is all over Columbia, right? So you have people in many departments in history and political science, right? You have people with different backgrounds in the university. So it's a huge amount of resources that you can access. So I was looking for someone who one could help me with the quantitative analytical side, right? And I knew that I wouldn't have from the dedicated faculty, right, from the three scholars in the program, but I knew that there were many other people, I mean, including Mark Hansen, right, who could work with me. And the quantitative side that I think one thing that I didn't mention. So my background before becoming a journalist was basically I have a degree in computer science, and then I also got a degree in journalism, right? So I had this hybrid background, and I wanted to use that in my research, right? So I wanted to go to a place that wouldn't be 100% quantitative, right? So, and I think that would be the case, for instance, if I went to the School of Information in Berkeley, right? And but at the same time, I wanted people who could help me in political communication, right, and help me frame my research, especially the qualitative side, in very firm ground, right. So I think that was more or less, I think, my reasoning.
Great. And so, for people looking at our professional programs, most of our professional master's programs are just a year long, so short. A doctoral program in the US is much longer. Andie, can you talk a bit about what the kind of the year by year typically looks like in terms of what a PhD program, specifically ours, would be like in terms of when you're doing classes and then what you do kind of in different phases of your doctoral study?
Mhm. Yeah, our program is it conforms to what is the a generally accepted format for PhD programs in U.S. universities. It probably will take you. You need to start by thinking it will probably take you about 5 to 7 years all told, depending on whether you have done previous graduate work that has resulted in an acceptable degree. You might get transfer credits for up to 1 year of coursework you've done elsewhere, but all students do at least 2 more years of coursework here. And if you don't have a previous graduate work, and that's fine, we're happy to consider applications from people whether or not they have done advanced graduate work already. But if you have not done any such work, you need to look at 3 years of coursework. If you have, it'll be 2 years of coursework. After that, we have a requirement for a series of tasks called the MPhil. The MPhil signifies you've done everything you're supposed to do up until the dissertation. So that means not just particular kinds of courses. We have 5 required courses, and the rest are your choice. Um, we require a foreign language exam. You just need to read it and render it into English. Don't get scared. Some people do, but it's not intimidating. We ask you to do a set of comprehensive exams, which either you have a choice, either a traditional set of exams where you have three advisors and you have a reading list and they give you questions and you do a written answer and then you do an oral answer. Or we ask you to do three tasks that any hiring committee would want to see your capacity in. We ask you to write a journal article, to get accepted to present at a conference, and to write a syllabus. And when you've done all of that, when you've done the coursework and those various tasks, that usually takes 3 to 4 to 5 years. Then you do your dissertation, which is the really fun part. And that can take, we've had people do a dissertation in an academic year. That's hard, but it's possible. We've had people take too much longer. There are limits. The university imposes specific limits on how long you can continue to work on a PhD. But most of our students have finished it, as I say, within 5 to 7 years.
Great. And Alex, as you think back on your years in the program, were there specific, I guess, courses we'll start with that were really memorable and valuable to you, and other kinds of experiences you had with the professors that you work with at Columbia?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the big strengths in the program, right? I mean, as we were saying, I mean, the you have the courses that are offered by the faculty in the program, right? But you also have this large extended faculty, and then you can access courses everywhere at Columbia, right? So I was looking at my transcript and I remembering the courses that I took. And I mean, I took Global Politics of Reproduction, Modern Political Thought, Central Issues in American Foreign Policy, data-driven approaches to campaigns, right? So I mean, there is this huge this this gamut of possibilities, right? And I remember, I mean, one course that for me was actually quite important afterwards. Not so much, I mean, the course was very interesting, but not so much for the course, but actually but for the connection that was created with the professor was when I took global media with Anja Schifrin, Professor Anja Schifrin at SIPA, at the School of International and Public Affairs. So the course was very interesting, and Anja was also a very important person during my time at Columbia, and I think to this day, right? So she invited me. So when I finished the course with her, she invited me to teach with her the following semester, right? So there was one thing that I did for the final project that she really liked, and she said, "Can you come and teach one of the modules in this course?" And then after that, every semester I would teach with her, right? So that experience was extremely useful, right? And it's actually quite useful even now that I'm using a lot of the material that I created for that course. I'm using for my courses here at the University of Illinois. And also through Anja, she connected me with a lot of very interesting people. So I also did some projects with Human Rights Watch that was really, really interesting. She helped me prepare, I mean, my job talk for here, right? So, I mean, so that bond was really interesting. And this is something that is quite common, right? I mean, the things that I did also with Mark, right, at the Brown Institute, right? So several projects that I did there. One, basically opening it was a data journalism program for the Brown Institute that we were opening the data from the Department of Defense here in the US, right? So basically how to make that data available, basically data from the budget of the Department of Defense. So making that data available for journalists, right? And to the point, I think, that it became a challenge because there were so many interesting things happening that basically I needed Michael, my advisor, to come to me and say, "Alex, all the things that you were doing are wonderful, but now you need to focus on your dissertation," right? So, and I think that's a good problem, right? I mean, to some extent, you need to have some discipline, but there are almost infinite possibilities, right, at Columbia, right? And the professors, they are quite open, especially if you show to them that you are very interested in what they are doing, right, and that there is a nice fit, right? They will invite you to work with them. So I think that was a very positive experience.
Great. And a couple follow-ups that has occurred to me. So most people probably attending this have done a 3 to 4 year bachelor's at least, and maybe have done a shorter master's program as you had before this. What's it like to be in a long duration kind of experience like this, which is, 5+ years, working on, continued research? What is that like as a student?
Again, I think that's very interesting, but it also comes with a challenge, right? To some extent, I mean, of course, the professors, they will be prodding you, right, towards getting a degree, right? But because there are so many things happening, I think you need at some point to say, okay, I finished the credits that I needed, right? So now I need to start moving towards the my dissertation, right? And to be very strategic about the things, the commitments that you make in order to be I mean to make progress towards your dissertation. At the same time, I mean, for sure, at least for me, it was, I think the dot pro program was much more enjoyable than especially when I was an undergrad, right? Because I think it's wonderful the fact that you can choose your research agenda, right? And to some extent, you can explore the things that you think are important, right? And at the same time, you have the support, you have a lot of very smart people to talk about those things that interest you. So I think it's a different dynamic, right? And I think it's why it's so tempting to keep prolonging it, right? And to stay doing that, right? And so yeah, I think at least for me, the experience for me, I think that's not for everyone, right? I think some people, when they start a PhD program, they may realize and say, hey, this is not actually what I want, right? I don't want this type of freedom, right? I want something that actually someone will come to me and say, hey, you need to do X, you need to do Z, right? And this is the very concrete deliverable that I expect from you at the end, right? A PhD program usually is not like that, right? I mean, to some extent, you are basically deciding which paths you're going to take, right? So if you are a person who loves doing that, I think that's a very enjoyable experience.
Great. And one more question I was thinking that came to me is that our master's programs are all like over 100 students are here each year in a master's program. Incoming class for the PhD is about 3 students right now. What is it like to be in a very small kind of cohort each year in this kind of program that's very small that way?
Yeah. So this is one thing that for me was very interesting in the program is that it's very rare to find students who are doing the same thing, right? So the usually people they are researching, their interests are quite different. And like I mean, I think the student that was closest to me was Danielle, and she was researching right-wing social media here in the US. And I was doing more or less the same thing in Brazil, right? So I think that was the closest, right, that I could find in the program. In general, everyone else was doing things that are very, very different from the things that I was doing. And for me, that's good for two reasons. One is it becomes a very interesting environment from an intellectual perspective, right? Because I mean, basically you are talking to people who are very different from you and who are researching different things and using different methods. And I think that helps to bring some oxygen, right, to your own research, right, to your own research agenda. And the second thing is that to be honest, I don't remember having any moment in the program where I felt, I mean, a lot of competition, right, for resources with the other students, right? Usually the relationship tend to be very collaborative, right? So everyone is basically helping each other, right? And I think one of the reasons is that, right, because we are so different and because our research agenda is so different, we are not competing for anything, right? So basically, and we have kind of this deep interest that the program succeeds, right? That everyone does well. So I think, yeah, I think it was, I mean, to this day I mean, last week I was in New York, right? And I was basically meeting with people in the program all the time, right? Having lunch with this person, dinner with that person. And there is very deep friendships, right? That also came out of from this program.
Great. That's really great to underscore how everyone has their own very specific kind of research that they're doing, and there's very, everyone has their own unique path. So that leads me to ask Andy, people are probably wondering about dissertations and kind of topics people have addressed in the past. Could you talk a little bit about what people have done dissertations on? Obviously, not each one in detail. And while you're doing that, I can also share our screen because there is a page on our website that shows kind of the topics of some of the previous classes that people can also review on their spare time as well.
Yeah, well, as Alex was saying, it's a wide range of stuff. We have people who are currently working on dissertations in social media platforms and the spread of extremist rhetoric, deep fakes and online gendered violence, political messaging in children's film, curiosity as a journalistic trait, women's bathrooms as communicative spaces. And that's some of the current work. We also have recent PhDs completed in among our most recent end-of-life narratives, binge watching, conservative media influencers in the Trump years, invisible ads. So there's a spine of connection among all of these things, but they do go off into a number of different directions, and these are all people who have found support for that kind of work.
Great. And yes, and on our website, if you find this page PhD student work, you can look at these topics and get a sense on just the vast, different interests people have had over the years in this cohort, in the different cohorts here at the PhD program. Alex, I see your one is listed here at the bottom of this page, social media and the rise of the new right in Brazil. Could you tell us a bit about how you developed that project? Was that something where you knew your kind of topic when you were coming into the program, or how did that evolve as you were taking your courses and determining what you wanted to spend your dissertation, time and energy, exploring?
Yeah, so at first I thought my work would be a continuation from my program and my master's, right? My master's thesis. And a continuation not so much on when it comes to the topic, but the method, right? And because I had a computer science background, most of my master's thesis was basically a quantitative analysis of social media, right? So I was able to code, to work with databases and collect data and analyze data, right? So I mean, it's a little bit like, I mean, for someone who has a hammer, everything becomes a nail, right? And my hammer was basically data analysis. So I'm going to use that for everything. And it's interesting that that changes. And to some extent, I think Michael, he, even before he became my advisor, he told me and said, I think you're going to change, right? And it's good. It's good because the people, they come to the program, to this program, and very often they change their plans, and that shows that we are doing something well here, right? That we are actually helping people to think through their plans. And so then over time, I mean, to some extent, I saw the Bolsonaro wave coming before it was evident. And by that, I mean, even before Bolsonaro, right? So I saw that there was a social political movement, right? Even before the protests in Brazil that happened in 2013, 2014, right? So even before that, I noticed that there was something happening, right? And on the right, and the right in Brazil after the dictatorship became this. I mean, nobody would self-identify as being right wing, right? Because that was connected to the dictatorship that was bad, right? And I saw that that was changing, right? That more and more you had people who were willing to basically to embrace the right wing identity, and I saw that social media would make that process even more acute, right? It would hasten that process, and because it would basically help people to bypass mainstream institutions, right, and talk directly to the people. So to some extent, oh, this is great. I think this is the topic of my dissertation, and I'm going to do quantitative analysis here. And then very early, I noticed that quantitative analysis, computational analysis especially, is more or less like a Rorschach test. So that test that you have an ink blot, and you look at the ink blot, and then you say what you are seeing, right? So sometimes you can look at the data and say, okay, I think X is happening, and then you say, no, 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 I think A is happening, right? Something else. And then I notice, I say, you know what? I need to to do qualitative research. I need to talk to people to understand actually what is happening, right? So I think that's why I changed the focus of my research. At the end, the quantitative analysis became an appendix at the end of my dissertation, and the bulk of my dissertation became the interviews, right, that I did for my research.
Let me
So, and
just,
please, Andy. Mhm.
no, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that basically, I mean, it took me a while to come to terms with that change. But then after I decided that, then I interviewed 60 people, right? My interviews, they took more or less 1 year, right, to finish, 1 year, 1 year and a half. And then it took me another 1 year and a half to write the dissertation, right? It became a quite long dissertation. That's actually became a problem because now I want to publish it. And I need to shorten it. I think there are two books there, not just one. I mean, it was 500 pages. So Michael, he had to come to me and say, Alex, stop writing. Stop, please. It's good enough. Move on. And but that also shows that it became very, again, for me, very enjoyable and very pleasant to do research and to understand better the things that I'm researching. Mhm.
I just wanted to add to that that yes, we want to know when you write your application what your interests are, but we don't hold you to that. We have never said to somebody you wrote this on your application and now you can't change your mind. We expect you to evolve. That's what a university is for. To what we try to do is guide you in your evolution. You need to have some sense of where you're starting, but we don't want a full dissertation proposal right now. We don't want the teachers you're going to work with. We don't want a list of the courses you're going to take. All of that will come. So and that's part of the adventure of it.
Great. And Andy, another question we get often is kind of what do you do with this degree once you've earned it after all this great work doing research and writing and doing the dissertation? What are some of the next steps for people? Do they often go into academic careers, or what are some of those trajectories over the years been like?
Yeah, yeah. We're a relatively new program. We started about 1998, and I know where I've been here since then, and I know where most of our graduates are. As Alex was saying, they tend to be close-knit and collaborative, so they keep in touch. I would say about half of our graduates now have tenured or tenure track teaching jobs. But we have other people who chose not to go into academia, and that's great too. We welcome people who have various life plans. We're not a program that sticks up our noses at people who don't want to be professors. So we do have people who have started their own research firms. We have people who were writers or journalists before and went back and are writers and journalists again, but in a different and deeper way. We have people who work in government, in NGOs, in finance, in law. So it's a wide range of outcomes for people, some of whom come in with one idea and come out with the other idea. But most people who have wanted to be in academia have found some kind of job that allows them to do that.
Great. And for those who've landed in academia, I made a few slides just to show some of the books that have been published by them to give people a little sense on what people have been doing in the years after finishing their doctorate here at Columbia. And I can just share that. And maybe we won't get into all of those, but just a few of them here. We have one, Julia Sonovan graduated a few years back and this is her second book, I think, Charm, but it was just named by the New Yorker as a book to read, I think, this week. It was one of the ones they recommended people check into, especially since we're in an election season in the US right now, about magnetic personalities in global politics. So that's pretty exciting. And then, yeah, I'll just go through a few more. And Andy, if you wanted to chime in on anyone, feel welcome to, but I'll just kind of pop through for a second.
Mhm.
And then this is Ben Peters on the left, who Alex was mentioning, who's a professor at the University of Tulsa. And this was, I think, was his book based on his dissertation, which was
Mhm.
about the Soviet internet history, which is pretty fascinating. And then Rasmus Nielsen, I think, was in the same cohort as him and worked on communication and politics as well. And then, some have some pretty global focus too. I know some people work on US, of course, Andy, and of course, Alex is working on Brazil, but a lot of people have done very, different countries, different parts of the world in terms of their research as well, like Catherine Brown. And then a couple more here. So this is just a little sense, a little snapshot. There's not all of them, and you can definitely go on the PhD work page again and look at those and get a sense on a lot of the dissertations people worked on. There's also a link to a lot of those to that book that those became in those cases where a book has already been published by our grads based on the work they were doing here at Columbia. That's a little snapshot of that. And then, Alex, here's your website here at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Can you talk a little bit about, what it's been like now to be a professor yourself at Illinois? And what was the academic job search like for you? What is that like, and how is that different, of course, than maybe a typical kind of career search for people who are looking for more of a job outside of universities?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned, I had already decided when I came to the program, I wanted to continue in academia, right? And but then when I finished the program, I was basically thinking, well, should I stay in the US? Should I go back to Brazil? And another question was, well, should I enter the academic job search now, or should I go for a postdoc? Right. So I was open basically to stay in the US, to go elsewhere, to go to Brazil. And I was also open to the postdoc option, right? And to be honest, I think I thought, I say, well, maybe it's good for me to do a postdoc right now. And because then I can basically work on on some publications and make some connections and then get into the academic job search. And then I saw the the job posting for this position, right? And I looked at it and I said, well, this is really because they were looking for someone who had a background and who ideally had experience in the newsroom, and I had, right? Someone who was interested in computational journalism, also to teach computational journalism, and I had that background, right? And someone who had experience in science reporting, and that was my experience in the newsroom, and someone to do research, right? This is something that I learned actually from Richard John in the program. This has many communication departments and many journalism departments, and here in the US, they usually have two groups of people. So people with PhDs and people with experience in newsrooms, right? And sometimes there is some tension, right, when you are hiring someone new, right? And which group will prevail, right? And then Richard said, "Hey, I think you have both, right? And I think this is something that and that I think made me help me to be confident and apply for this position. So in a way, my job search was unusual because I know that many times when people they are into the academic job market, they apply for several positions, right? In my case, I basically all my eggs were in one basket, right? So I only applied for this position, and I was very happy when I got it, right? And I was also I applied for two positions in Brazil, so that was also in my that was also a possibility. But then when I received the response from University of Illinois, then I told them that I was going to embrace this position. And what else? Yeah, so I think that was more or less, I mean, my how the academic job search for me. I also got I was I tried three postdoc positions. One of them I didn't get, one of them I got, and one I was waiting for an answer. So that was basically my the programs that I applied for.
Great. And
Mhm.
then another question for Alex about, giving some advice to people who are attending the session or watching it later. Some of them are maybe still finishing their bachelor's degrees. Some of them have been working in different fields for a while. Some of them might have another master's degree or some other professional degree and are thinking about this doctorate. What advice do you have people who are just thinking about a doctorate in general, about like what that kind of commitment will mean and how to think about, what that could look like if they're going to apply for a program like this?
I think, I mean, I have a maybe a theoretical piece of advice and a very practical one. And I think the more theoretical one is, I mean, you need to be very intentional. It's a huge investment of time and energy, right? So it's several years of your life, right? And again, those can be amazing years and very, very interesting but you need to know that okay, I'm willing to make this commitment. I think a PhD is not a good alternative if you don't know exactly why you're doing a PhD, right? So it's a moment for me, okay, to find myself. I don't think that's a good idea, right? I think it has to be part of a larger narrative of your life, right? I mean, you need to know, okay, this is part of the reason that I want to do a PhD now is X, right? Because I want to teach afterwards, or because I want to do research in a think tank or in a university, right? So I think it's, or maybe I have this project, right? I mean, I think I want to write a book about this topic, and this is going to shape my career afterwards, right? To some extent, our PhD program, I think, is good for that in a way, because you can write your dissertation as a book, right? At least that was the recommendation that I got from Michael. And say, write your dissertation already as a research project and framed as a book, right? So to some extent, but I think you do need to have a kind of a goal, right? And this is, yeah. And the practical advice is, if possible, talk to students, right? To alumni, to people who are in the program now, right? Talk to the professors, right? And I think this is not just for this program, right? So I think it's very important, I mean, to get kind of a first person experience, right? Of the first hand experience of the what the program looks like, right? And the things that people are doing, right? I know that some people here who are already contacted me and I talked to them. So, and I think this is great, right? I mean, I'm sure most people who, most alums, most alumni in the program, and the professors, they're quite responsive, right? So they will, if you contact them, they will answer, right? So yeah, so I think this is my practical piece of advice.
Great, thanks. And Andie, of course, as someone who's core faculty in this program, what advice do you have for people who are now maybe having at least 2 months still to complete an application if they're thinking of applying this season? What should they be thinking about in terms of, again, the fit and also like what they should be focusing on in that application?
Yeah, well, I echo Alex's advice that you need to want it. You don't need to maybe understand deeply what it is you're going to end up with. As I said, we expect that your ideas will evolve. But if you don't think that it's really fun to do research, it's really fun to grapple with ideas, it's really fun to test your thinking with other people. If you like those activities, that's a good sign. If you don't, think about what it is that you hope to get instead. There are times when I was doing my own PhD that I thought, I cannot imagine anything I'd rather be doing right now. This is the most fun in the world. And there were a couple of times, I will confess, that I was going to run away and join the Peace Corps. Everybody has those moments. Um, but what it takes is a dedication to the world of ideas, whatever that is for you, whatever that means to you. And if you think it will be fun, and it will be.
Great advice from both of you. And now I've opened up our chat to people who have questions that you'd like to potentially pose to myself or our faculty and alum. Please post those to me, Ross, the host, in the chat, as opposed to my co-hosts, Andie and Alex. Just post them to me, and I'll see if we can answer those. If it's more specific about, admissions policies, you can reach out to our office independently about that. All right. So looking here, so a question, Alex, you said you had been working as a science journalist, years before you came here. Do you need to have a background in journalism professionally to be a good candidate for this program?
Uh, the answer is no. I think many of my colleagues in the program, they had experience in newsrooms, right? But you also had people who didn't have experiences as working as journalists, right, in newsrooms. So basically both. I mean, I think a lot of people who have experience in journalism, they feel attracted to this program because it's housed at Columbia Journalism School, right? So to some extent, I think there is that, and I think the professors, they have scholarship, right, in the area of the history of journalism or the sociology of journalism, right? So to some extent, if you want to do research in journalism, and many times journalists, they want to do research on journalism, right? So I think that's one reason that there is a bias there, right? But again, I have many colleagues who didn't have an experience as journalists, right? I don't know if Andy wants to add anything to.
No, we're happy to consider applications from former journalists. We're happy to consider applications from people who have never been a journalist. But as you say, Alex, a lot of it shapes what it is that makes a student want to come and do work here. People with journalism backgrounds often bring a different kind of sensibility to what they want to think about research. They bring their own lived experience, which sometimes brings them in a different place. Um, we are very attractive to people who are interested in journalism as a whole. But we many of our applicants tend to be past college. They're not recent college graduates. We are happy to consider recent college graduates, but many of them tend to be people who have been out in the world working for at least a few years and have a sense from their own work, from their experience, what it is that interests them and where they want to go. Whatever your background is will feed what you do.
That leads to a question from somebody who may be in the shoes of being, just finishing college relatively recently. If they haven't been out there, what might you look for someone kind of in an earlier stage? They haven't, worked professionally, maybe haven't gotten a master's degree, which is not required to apply here. But what we look for someone a little younger, maybe who's applying to the program.
Yeah, we want to have a sense of why you're interested in doing a PhD, what it is you hope you will take from it. We understand that your academic background, your CV is going to be shorter, that you will not have had the kind of work experience that many other people have had. And we take that into account. What interests us most is how well you did in your undergraduate career, not necessarily what you studied. We've accepted people who have majored in everything from communications or journalism to math. What we want is an excellent academic record. We want to see, we don't have minimum GPAs or anything like that, but we want to know that you understand the world of scholarship and are capable of functioning there. We look at letters of reference from professors you've had. That's a disadvantage that some of our older applicants have, is that they don't have a recent reference from a professor who knows how they function in an academic arena. If you're a current or recent college grad, you can supply those people more easily. So that's an advantage that you might have. But we don't really distinguish when we look at applications between recent college grads and people who've been out in the world. We look at each one holistically and make our judgments from that.
Great. And a question about, as you said, Andy, and you don't necessarily have to have a dissertation fully realized that you're explaining in your application. Obviously, you have to have some research interests and explain why they are, well suited for this type of multidisciplinary program. Is there any advice in terms of whether people should they be pitching these ideas to us in advance, trying to get an early sense of whether this is going to work well with this program, or what would you advise for people who are, having an idea and wanting to like run that by the school?
Yeah. Um, that's not terribly helpful, I think, to the student. We don't require a full-fledged dissertation proposal. We look with suspicion on people who have one because we think if you have a full-fledged proposal, go out and write the book. Don't come to school. But we also it doesn't do us much good, and it doesn't do the student much good to send us something and say, is this how do you feel about this? Because first of all, each faculty member is one member of the admissions committee. The committee makes a decision, not each faculty member. But also we it's an individual response that is not going to say a lot about what your entire application will look like.
Mhm. Great. A question. I know this year we have reinstituted the GRE as a requirement for the applications to this program. We will not be offering waivers for that, but maybe people are just wondering, what the value of that, or is that going to be the most important part of the application, or how should people think of the GRE in the way that you're evaluating holistically an application?
Yeah, I know that some people are nervous about the GRE. We understand, for instance, that as I've said, we have many people who apply being out of college for many years. They may look at the math section of the GRE in horror. We understand that. It's a part of the application. It really, the only time that it may have a disproportionate impact is if it's particularly low or particularly high. If it's in the very large acceptable middle range, it's part of the piece of the application, but isn't going to be dispositive in one way or another.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good advice. And then for GRE questions, in terms of waivers, as I said, or for TOEFL waivers, we do not offer those. So I know we get a lot of questions throughout the year about those. So I'd say since it's at this point in history, right now it's October 16th, there's 2 months until the applications are due for the PhD program. So I would say if you really want to apply and you're wanting to kind of keep discussing the GRE or the TOEFL, it's not really going to be worthwhile to spend a lot of time doing that. So I would definitely just schedule an exam that works well for you in the next couple months and just get that off of your plate. So I would say that's the best way to proceed if you are kind of having those kind of thoughts about, do I need to take this? The answer is yes, if you want to apply, and just try to get that settled, in a way that will work well with the rest of your schedule for the fall. So go ahead and do that. And then another question about whether someone, if they haven't gotten a master's yet, should maybe do that as a way to help their odds of getting admitted to the program. It's going to be worth it to get a terminal master's degree somewhere else in order to be more competitive for admission.
Mm. It's a difficult question and a very individual question, I think. In general, we don't distinguish when we look at our application pool. We don't distinguish between people with masters and people without masters. We don't prefer one or the other. We look at your background holistically, as I've said. If you've been out of school for a very long time and are yourself maybe uncertain about whether academia is right for you, a master's degree might be a way that you can answer your own questions, not ours, but your own questions. You can see how that fits. But I don't think that there is a point in to applying and getting a master's simply to increase your chances. Your chances are you won't be measured. You won't be competing against people who have this situation or that situation. We look at everybody the same.
And a question,
Can I add one thing?
sure,
Yeah, it's interesting because I had the same question before I applied for my master's actually. And when I talked to Ben Peters, and he said, well, it's not required. In your case, because you are now, yeah, I was not in academia, I was in the newsroom, right? And because I was coming from Brazil, so in my particular situation, he thought in your case may be useful actually to come to the US for a master's, because then you get to know academia here and also you prepare yourself, I mean, to be a stronger applicant, right? But again, I agree with Andy that I think it's basically is a very personal, particular decision.
Mhm. Great. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So another one about the application in terms of like essays. Someone's wondering, is it helpful kind of lay out the kind of faculty you'd want to work with within the core faculty amongst us at the journalism school and then the subcommittee? And also a follow-up is whether if there's faculty maybe who aren't formally on that list of subcommittee members in other departments, can you still maybe, say you'd like to work with other faculty outside of that list when you're applying?
It's somewhat helpful in only that it gives the admissions committee a sense of the kind of work you're interested in doing. But unless there is something specific you want to say about, I've read this professor's book, and this is what I got from this book, and this is what inspired me, and this is what challenges me, and here's how it shapes my thinking, that would be helpful to us. If you say, I feel like working with Professor X, less important to us. There are what is it about Professor X? What is it? What appeals to you there? So I would suggest that's not a tremendously important part of the application unless there's something really specific you can say. It is possible when you get down the road toward the dissertation, it is possible that you can work with advisors who are not members of that core faculty, the 13 or 14 people on our webpage. There are certain restrictions and policies about having a co-advisor. We don't need to get into that now. But the people in the committee are all people who are really interesting and useful for you to get to know. And we often suggest to students who are choosing their courses, look at the things that those professors offer. They're people who we know are sympathetic to our program. They qualify as advisors and supervisors. If you can also, you're perfectly welcome to say there's a professor in political science I want to work with, and that maybe gives us a little information. It doesn't guarantee that you'll be able to work with that professor in political science because we don't control the political science enrollment. That's entirely up to that department. So it's minimally useful, I would say.
Mhm. Great, I'm gonna ask one more question, but in the meantime, I'm gonna put in our chat a link that Professor Tucker has put together, which is very helpful FAQ page, which gets into a lot of detail about a lot of different questions you might have now or later, and you can see the answers to a lot of those key things about the program there. But a final question is, Alex, you're teaching now, obviously as a professor at Illinois. What kind of training or experience can our students get in terms of teaching? When they're in that program, like if they obviously are looking for that as a career path, do they get chances to do teaching, TAing, that kind of thing to help have that experience under their belt? This is a question, I guess, for Andie first and then Alex, maybe.
Well, we do as part of the students receive a standard financial aid package, and in return they do some service as either a teaching or a research assistant. Teaching assistants, the opportunities at the journalism school are somewhat limited for teaching assistants because we don't have an undergraduate population, which is where most TAs are put to work. We do ask people to TA in some of the larger lecture courses in the master's program, covering history, business, ethics, and law. We sometimes, if a student has journalism experience, we have placed students as TAs in some of the master's courses. Sometimes it's possible for a student to be a TA in a department outside the journalism school if those certain conditions are met. There are also research assistantships that are possible. But it's difficult to predict each semester what TA-ships, what positions are available because the needs of the school change.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Alex, now with your teaching, what things were helpful during your time as a student that you've been able to draw from, when you are teaching classes and creating syllabi and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I think in my case, because I also taught, I mean, I was a teaching assistant for a couple of courses at the JA school, at the journalism school, and that was for me very interesting to get to know the professors and the community in the school. But most of the time, I was a research assistant, actually, working either for the Tell Center or the Brown Institute. And that experience was amazing. Also, because if you are strategic, I mean, basically, they give you a lot of freedom, right, to define also the type of research that you're going to do there. And so then you can do things that are somehow related to your topics of interest, right? So I think and basically you are paid for that, right? To work on something that you like. But also I made this connection with Professor Anya Schifrin, right? And then I was able to teach, right? Not just to be a teaching assistant, but actually to become a lecturer, right? Working with her at the School of International and Public Affairs. So I think this is something that I think it's a good path, basically to forge a relationship with a professor, right? And to tell her or him that you would love to, I mean, to if there is the possibility of teaching with them, right, or working with them, right, and sometimes that possibility exists, right. And as I told you, I mean, basically I was able to use many of the classes that I prepared to teach at SIPA. I'm now using those same classes here at the University of Illinois, right. So it was a very very interesting experience.
We do have one opportunity for traditional TAing. I teach a course every other year or so called Journalism and Public Life for undergraduates. And the class is modestly sized, anywhere between 20 and 40 people. And I always have a TA for that class. So that's an opportunity for very traditional kind of assisting a professor in an undergrad class. But that's just one opportunity there.
And actually, to be honest, now, thanks, Andy, because then I remember I also did something similar with Professor Richard John, who also teaches courses for undergrads, right? So again, this is also another path that you can, is basically working with Andy or Richard. That's also, I think, an interesting path.
Well, great. Well, I think we're heading up at the end of the hour. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for your questions. If they were too specific, maybe to ask to this crew today, or if we didn't get to them today, please just write to us at apply.journalism@columbia.edu, and we'll be able to get the answers that you might need to those specific questions about the application process a little later. I'd like to thank Professor Andie Tucker and Professor Alex Gonçalves for such great insights into this really unique program. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're watching watching this live or if you're watching this in the next few days, you have about 2 months to get an application together. So please take the advice that Alex and Andie have offered about how to, think about doctoral study and think about your application. And definitely don't feel too rushed, I hope, but get together, the right type of, essays and materials that will help, be best suited for this type of degree. And to definitely do your research, explore the dissertations people have done, explore what our faculty are experts at, and make sure that this is the right fit for you, and then make a case for yourself and definitely apply by December 15th for this, great doctoral program. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye bye.